The grand chamber of the Coalition warship Eternal Dawn, stretched out like a cathedral built for giants. Holographic displays floated in the air, casting blue and silver light across the faces of delegates from 12 different alien species. Some had scales, others had crystalline skin that reflected light in strange patterns. A few floated in specialized atmosphere tanks, their tentacles moving slowly in the thick liquid. This was the Galactic Council, and today they had gathered to discuss their newest members, humanity. Commander Tavrex stood at the center podium, his tall frame covered in purple and black scales that shifted color when he moved. He was Vorleon, one of the oldest and most respected warrior races in the galaxy. His 3 eyes blinked independently as he gestured toward the main display screen. The other delegates leaned forward in their seats, curious about what he wanted to show them. Esteemed members of the council, Tavrex began, his voice carrying a musical quality that the translation devices turned into smooth words. I present to you the recent human victory against the Razor Gulf pirates. Watch carefully, and you will understand my concerns about our new allies. The screen flickered to life. Battle footage played from multiple angles, captured by automated recording drones. A human fleet engaged a group of pirate vessels near an asteroid field. The ships were small and boxy compared to the elegant curves of Coalition vessels. They moved in tight formations, firing projectile weapons that glowed red as they cut through the vacuum of space. The delegates watched in silence at first. Then, as the battle continued, quiet murmurs began to spread through the chamber. Are those chemical propellants? Asked one delegate, a being made of living crystal whose voice sounded like wind chimes. Primitive, commented another, shaking their massive head. We abandoned such technology 3,000 years ago. Tavrex allowed himself a small smile. Indeed, but wait, it gets more interesting. Watch what happens when their boarding teams engage the pirate ship. The view changed to interior camera footage. Human soldiers in bulky armor rushed through narrow corridors, their boots clanging on metal floors. They held rifles in their hands, weapons that seemed heavy and awkward. When they encountered pirates, both sides fired at each other with actual bullets instead of energy weapons. The sound was deafening, even through the recording. What shocked the delegates most was how the humans fought. They didn't use advanced combat algorithms or synchronized drone attacks. Instead, they shouted to each other. Actual words screamed over the gunfire. They threw themselves around corners, using their own bodies as shields for their companions. When one soldier was hit and fell, 2 others immediately grabbed him and dragged him backward, even though this meant exposing themselves to enemy fire. Listen to them, Tavrex said, turning up the audio. The sounds of human voices filled the chamber. Covering fire, covering fire. Man down, I need help here. Push forward, don't let them regroup. Nobody gets left behind, you hear me? Nobody! The delegates began to laugh. It started as quiet chuckles but grew louder. The crystalline beings' laughter sounded like breaking glass. The floating creatures in their tanks released bubbles that popped in rhythmic patterns. They coordinate through shouting, one delegate said between laughs. What happens if their communication equipment fails? They improvise, Tavrex answered, letting disapproval drip from his words. They rely on emotion rather than logic. They make decisions based on feelings instead of tactical superiority. Another delegate, a being with 6 arms and gray skin, pointed at the screen. Look at how much energy they waste on retrieving wounded. A logical species would leave the injured and complete the mission. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. Exactly my point, Tavrex said, warming to his argument. And notice their tactics. They charge enemy positions head-on. They take unnecessary risks. They expose themselves to danger when patient strategy would serve better. They fight like cornered animals, not civilized warriors. The footage continued. The humans cleared the pirate ship deck by deck. They didn't use surgical strikes or precise elimination protocols. They simply overwhelmed each position with aggressive assault, always moving forward, always protecting each other. The pirates, despite having better defensive positions, eventually surrendered. They won, observed one delegate carefully. They won inefficiently, Tavrex corrected. 37 humans were injured in this engagement. 12 required serious medical treatment. If they had used proper orbital bombardment and drone assault teams, they could have achieved victory with 0 casualties. More nodding from the assembled delegates. This made sense to them. Why risk living beings when technology could do the work? Why charge into danger when you could eliminate threats from a safe distance? In the back corner of the chamber, away from the main group, sat the human delegation. There were only 3 of them, looking small and uncomfortable in the vast space. Lieutenant Deho felt his hands curl into fists as he listened to the aliens laugh at his people. His face grew hot with anger and he started to rise from his seat. Captain Mireille's hand fell on his shoulder, firm and commanding. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and gray streaks in her black hair. She had fought in more battles than most of these aliens had ever seen, and she knew when to fight and when to stay silent. "Easy, Lieutenant," she whispered. "Let them laugh." "Captain, they're mocking us," Deho hissed back, keeping his voice low. "They're treating us like primitive savages." "They don't understand," Mireille replied calmly. "They don't need to. Not yet." The 3rd member of their delegation, Ensign Jiwan, leaned toward them. She was young, barely 25, and this was her first diplomatic assignment. "Shouldn't we defend ourselves? Explain why we fight the way we do?" Mireille shook her head slightly. "You can't explain heart to someone who only understands mathematics. They'll learn in time." Back at the podium, Tavrex continued his presentation. He showed more footage, breaking down every mistake the humans made. Every time a soldier exposed himself to save a comrade. Every moment when emotions drove decisions instead of cold logic. Every instance of humans doing something dangerous when something safe was available. The delegates ate it up. They nodded wisely, made notes on their data pads, and exchanged knowing looks. Humanity was brave, they agreed. But bravery without intelligence was just recklessness. Humans might be useful as shock troops, as disposable soldiers for the most dangerous missions, but they would never be true warriors. Not like the advanced species of the Coalition. Yet one figure in the chamber did not laugh. Fleet Marshal Kaelnor sat in his private observation box, elevated above the other delegates. He was old for a Vorlian. His scales faded to a dull gray that spoke of centuries lived. He had commanded fleets for 40 years and never lost a battle. He was a legend, a military genius whose strategies were studied in academies across the galaxy. His 3 eyes remained fixed on the screen, unblinking. He watched as human soldiers dragged their wounded from the battlefield. He saw them refuse to leave anyone behind, even when it meant putting themselves in danger. He noticed something in their movements, in the way they worked together, that the other delegates missed entirely. When the footage showed a human soldier throwing himself on a grenade to save his squad, taking the explosion himself, the delegates laughed at the waste of a life. But Kaelnor did not laugh. His central eye narrowed, and his clawed hand gripped the armrest of his chair until the metal groaned. The presentation ended. Tavrex bowed to scattered applause. The delegates filed out, still chuckling about the primitive humans and their emotional warfare. The human delegation stood and left quietly, ignored by most of the aliens around them. Fleet Marshal Kaelnor remained in his observation box long after the chamber emptied. He replayed the footage on his private display, watching it again and again. His expression never changed, but something deep in his ancient eyes suggested he saw things the others had missed. In 40 years of warfare, in countless battles across hundreds of worlds, he had learned one universal truth. The most dangerous warriors were not the ones with the best technology or the smartest tactics. The most dangerous warriors were the ones who had something worth dying for and refused to abandon it, no matter the cost. The humans had that something, and for the first time in decades, Fleet Marshal Kaelnor felt a cold touch of fear in his chest. 3 weeks passed after the council meeting. The mockery did not stop. In coalition mess halls and training facilities, soldiers from other species told jokes about humans. They imitated the way humans shouted during battle. They laughed about the primitive weapons and the emotional decision-making. The humans heard these jokes and said nothing, but their eyes grew harder each day. Then came the new assignment. A mining colony on the planet Vescara had been taken over by insurgent forces. The colony produced rare minerals essential for coalition technology. 2,000 civilians were trapped there, along with the insurgents who had killed the security forces and declared independence from coalition rule. The coalition commanders gathered in the war room of the flagship. Holographic displays showed the colony from every angle. It was built into the side of a mountain, with deep tunnels running underground where the mining operations took place. The insurgents had fortified the entrance and set up defensive weapons on the ridges above. Commander Tavrex presented the battle plan. "The solution is simple," he said, gesturing at the display. We conduct orbital bombardment on the defensive positions. Then we send in automated combat drones to clear the facility level by level. Estimated time to completion 6 hours. Estimated coalition casualties 0. The other commanders nodded approvingly. It was elegant, efficient, and safe. Everything a proper military operation should be. Captain Murray stood up from where the human delegation sat. "I would like to propose an alternative," she said quietly. The room fell silent. Several alien commanders exchanged glances. One of them, a tall being with blue skin and 4 arms, made a gesture that the translator interpreted as a polite cough. "Captain, we appreciate your input, but this is a complex military operation. Perhaps it would be better to observe and learn from more experienced." "There are 2,000 civilians down there," Mireille interrupted. Her voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. "Your orbital bombardment will collapse the tunnels. The drones will treat every warm body as a potential threat. By the time you're finished, how many of those civilians will still be alive?" Tavrex's scales shifted to a darker color, showing irritation. "Some casualties are inevitable, but we will save the majority, and more importantly, we will not risk coalition soldiers." "My people can do better," Mireille said. She stepped forward and touched the holographic controls. The display zoomed in on the tunnel systems beneath the colony. "These tunnels connect to old mining shafts 3 kilometers from the main entrance. My soldiers can infiltrate through here, moving underground. We evacuate the civilians first, then deal with the insurgents. Minimal casualties, both civilian and military." "And how many human soldiers will you lose?" asked another commander, genuinely curious. "Some," Mireille admitted. "But that's what soldiers are for. We protect those who cannot protect themselves." The alien commanders discussed this among themselves in their various languages. The translation devices created a confusing babble of sound. Finally, Tavrex spoke. "Your plan is unnecessarily risky. Why send living soldiers when machines can do the work? Why complicate the mission with concern for enemy civilians?" "They're not enemy civilians," Mireille said firmly. "They're just people who got caught in a bad situation. And we don't leave people behind." The debate continued for another hour. Eventually, a compromise was reached. The coalition would prepare for orbital bombardment as planned, but they would give the humans 12 hours to try their infiltration plan first. If it failed, the aliens would do things their way. Mireille gathered her soldiers in the hangar of their transport ship, the Incheon Dawn. There were 60 of them, volunteers all. They checked their equipment in silence, the practiced movements of people who had done this many times before. Sergeant Hyunwoo approached Mirai. He was a big man with scars on his face and hands that never stopped moving. "Captain, the squad leaders are ready. We've studied the tunnel maps. It's going to be tight down there." "I know," Mirai said. "The aliens think we're being stupid. Maybe we are. But I've never left civilians to die when there was another choice. And I'm not starting now." "Wouldn't have it any other way, ma'am," Hyunwoo replied with a slight grin. The insertion went smoothly at first. 3 transport ships landed far from the colony, hidden by the mountain range. The human soldiers disappeared into the old mining tunnels, moving in teams of 5. They carried rifles, medical supplies, and demolition charges. Their armor was lighter than what coalition soldiers wore, allowing them to move faster in the tight spaces. Sergeant Hyunwoo led the first squad through tunnels so narrow they had to turn sideways in some places. They used handheld lights because their electronic equipment kept failing. The insurgents had set up jamming devices throughout the colony. The aliens would have been helpless without their advanced communications, but the humans adapted quickly. "Hand signals from here," Hyunwoo whispered to his team. They acknowledged with quick nods. They moved through the darkness like ghosts. When they encountered locked doors, they picked the locks or used small charges to blow them open. When they found civilians hiding in side chambers, they gave them water and basic medical care. A young girl with a bleeding arm stared at Hyunwoo with wide eyes. "It's okay," he said gently, wrapping a bandage around her arm. "We're getting you out of here. Just stay quiet and follow Private Sungho. He'll take you to the extraction point." Private Sungho was the youngest member of the squad, barely 20 years old. He accepted the responsibility without question, leading a group of 15 civilians back through the tunnels they had cleared. Deeper in the colony, other human teams worked with quiet efficiency. They communicated with whispered words and hand signals. When electronic equipment failed, they used physical maps drawn on paper. When they couldn't see, they felt their way forward. It was primitive, but it worked. Corporal Jisu's team encountered their first insurgents in a large chamber that had once been used for equipment storage. There were 5 insurgents armed with stolen military weapons. They had their backs to the entrance, watching monitors that showed the colony's main gates. Jisoo raised her hand, stopping her team. She pointed to 2 soldiers, then to the left. Pointed to 2 more, then to the right. They moved into position silently. "Coalition forces," Jisoo called out in the trade language most species understood. "Drop your weapons. We're here for the civilians, not for you. You can surrender and live." The insurgents spun around, raising their weapons. For a moment, everything froze. Then one of the insurgents slowly lowered his rifle. "You're human," he said, confused. The other said Coalition would just bomb us from orbit. "We're not the others," Jisoo replied. "Now put down the weapons. All of you." 3 more insurgents lowered their weapons. The 5th one, young and scared, kept his rifle aimed at Jisoo. His hands were shaking. "It's okay," Jisoo said softly, the way someone might talk to a frightened animal. "Nobody has to die here today. We just want to take the civilians and leave. You can have your colony. We don't care about your politics." The young insurgent's rifle slowly dropped. Jisoo's team secured them with restraints and moved on. This scene repeated throughout the colony. Human soldiers found civilians and guided them to safety. They encountered insurgents and offered surrender before violence. Sometimes the insurgents fought, and then the humans fought back with brutal efficiency, but they always tried talking first. After 8 hours, Captain Mirai stood at the tunnel entrance 3 kilometers from the colony. Behind her, nearly 1,800 civilians streamed out into the sunlight. They were dirty, scared, and some were injured, but they were alive. Medics moved among them, treating wounds and handing out water and food. Lieutenant Deho approached, his armor scorched from a firefight. "That's most of them, Captain. Hyunwoo's team is bringing out the last group now. We've secured the insurgent leaders. Minimal resistance once they realized we weren't there to kill everyone." "Casualties?" Mirai asked. 16 injured on our side. 2 serious, but they'll make it. We lost Private Yunji. Took a round protecting a family in Sector 7. Mirai closed her eyes briefly. Another name to remember. Another letter to write to a family back on Earth. Insurgent casualties. 12 dead, 23 wounded. We've treated their wounded alongside ours. From orbit, the coalition commanders watched in silence. Their displays showed the human soldiers emerging from the tunnels with the civilians. They saw human medics treating both their own wounded and enemy insurgents with equal care. They saw soldiers sharing their rations with hungry children. Commander Tavrex stared at the screens. 16 human soldiers injured, 2 critical, 1 dead. And they chose this over the safe option. "They saved nearly all the civilians," observed another commander. "The colony infrastructure is intact." The insurgents surrendered their leaders in exchange for amnesty for the others. "Inefficient," Tavrex said, but his voice lacked conviction. In his observation room, Fleet Marshal Kaelnor watched the same footage. He saw Captain Mirai walking among her soldiers, checking on each one personally. He saw her stop at a stretcher where the body of Private Yunji lay covered with a flag. Mirai knelt beside it for a long moment, her head bowed. Then he watched her stand, square her shoulders, and return to work. The alert came in the middle of the night cycle, screaming through every ship in the coalition fleet. Red emergency lights flashed in corridors and cabins. Soldiers rushed to their stations, still pulling on uniforms and armor. In the command center of the flagship, screens filled with data that made even the most experienced commanders feel their blood run cold. The Cathron had returned. Every species in the galaxy had heard stories about the Cathron swarm. They were a hive mind species, millions of individuals controlled by a single consciousness. 50 years ago, the Coalition had fought a desperate war against them and won, driving them back to the edge of known space. Everyone believed the Cathron were too weak to threaten the galaxy again. Everyone was wrong. The Cathron fleet appeared without warning, dropping out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. Thousands of ships all moving with the synchronized precision of a single organism. They bypassed military installations and headed straight for their real target, Praxis 4, an agricultural world that fed 8 star systems and was home to 6 billion souls. Fleet Marshal Kaelnor stood at the command center's main display, his 3 eyes taking in every detail. Around him, commanders from every coalition species shouted orders and coordinated fleet movements. The mood was controlled chaos. All available ships are converging on Praxis 4, reported a Vorlian tactical officer. We'll have 327 vessels in position within 4 hours. Cathron fleet composition? Kaelnor asked, his voice cutting through the noise. Over 2,000 ships, sir, ranging from small fighters to carriers the size of moons. They're moving in standard swarm patterns, but there's something different about their tactics this time. Kaelnor studied the display. The officer was right. The Cathron were moving differently than they had 50 years ago. They were smarter, more coordinated. The hive mind had learned from its defeat. Commander Tavrex joined Kaelnor at the display. We need to establish a defensive perimeter around Praxis 4. Use our superior technology to hold them at bay until they exhaust their resources. It worked last time. Last time they didn't have 50 years to prepare. Kaelnor said quietly. But yes, prepare the defensive perimeter. It's our best option. The Coalition fleet assembled around Praxis 4 like a steel fortress. Warships took up positions in a sphere around the planet, their weapons charged and ready. Advanced defense platforms deployed between the ships, creating overlapping fields of fire. It was a masterpiece of military engineering, designed by the best strategic minds in the galaxy. The Cathron fleet arrived and immediately attacked. The first wave hit the Coalition lines like a hammer. Cathron ships dove at the defenses in tight formations, firing biological weapons that burst through shields and ate through metal. Coalition ships returned fire with energy weapons and missiles. The space between the planet and the attackers became a storm of light and destruction. The Coalition held. Ships were lost, but the line remained intact. Commanders congratulated themselves on their strong defense. Then the second wave hit, and the third and the fourth. The Cathron kept coming, throwing ships at the defenses like water against a dam. And every time they attacked, they learned. They adapted to Coalition weapons. They found weaknesses in the defensive formations. They changed their tactics faster than the Coalition could respond. On the second day of battle, a Cathron carrier punched through the defensive line in Sector 7. Coalition ships moved to fill the gap, but 3 more Cathron vessels slipped through before they could close it. Those ships headed straight for Praxis 4's atmosphere. Sector 7 compromised, a tactical officer reported. Cathron landing craft inbound to the planet's surface. Kaelnor watched the display with growing concern. The Cathron were not trying to win through superior force. They were probing, testing, looking for any weakness, and they were finding them. By the third day, the Coalition defensive line was crumbling. More Cathron ships broke through. More landing craft reached the planet's surface. Reports came in from Praxis 4 of Cathron ground forces attacking civilian centers. The Coalition commanders held an emergency meeting in the war room. The holographic display showed the deteriorating situation in painful detail. Red markers indicated Cathron breakthroughs. Orange markers showed Coalition ships too damaged to continue fighting effectively. We need to fall back, Commander Tavrex said. The words came hard to him, but the tactical situation was clear. We pull the fleet back, evacuate essential personnel from the planet, and then conduct orbital bombardment to eliminate the Cathron forces on the surface. That will kill billions of civilians, objected a commander from a species known for their diplomatic skills. Some of them, yes, Tavrex admitted. But if we stay and the fleet is destroyed, the Cathron will take this entire sector. We lose billions either way. At least this option preserves our military strength. The room filled with argument. Some commanders agreed with Tavrex. Others searched desperately for alternatives. All of them knew deep down that the math was brutal but clear. They couldn't hold this position forever. Captain Mirai stood up from where the human delegation sat. How long until you begin the evacuation? 2 hours, Tavrex replied. All ships will begin pulling back from the defensive line. And how many civilians can you evacuate in that time? Tavrex hesitated. Perhaps 50,000. The priority is military personnel and government officials. 50,000 out of 6 billion, Mirai said softly. That's what they're worth to you? Captain, please understand, another commander said, trying to sound reasonable. This is not an ideal situation, but we must preserve the Coalition's ability to fight. We can evacuate some civilians, conduct the bombardment, and then rebuild. It's the logical choice. Mirai looked around the room at all the alien faces, so sure of their logic, so comfortable with their calculations. She thought about the girl with the bleeding arm that Hyunwoo had bandaged in the tunnels. She thought about Private Yoonji. who had died protecting a family she didn't know. She thought about every person she had ever served with who had understood one simple truth. Some things were worth dying for. No, she said simply. Excuse me? Tavrex looked confused. I said no. I refuse your order. The Incheon Dawn will not retreat. The room exploded with noise. Multiple commanders spoke at once, their translation devices creating a cacophony. Tavrex's scales turned a deep purple, showing extreme agitation. You cannot refuse a direct order from Coalition Command. Watch me, Mirai said. She turned and walked toward the door. Captain, if you do this, you will be court-martialed. Your entire crew could face charges of mutiny. You will throw away your career and possibly your freedom. Mirai stopped at the door and looked back. I've spent 23 years in uniform. I've followed orders, fought battles, and done everything my commanders asked. But I will not abandon 6 billion people to die because it's the mathematically sound decision. If that means court-martial, fine. But I'm going down there. She left the war room. Lieutenant Daeho and Ensign Jiwon followed her without hesitation. Aboard the Incheon Dawn, Mirai stood before her crew in the main hangar. They were all there, every soldier and pilot and technician waiting to hear what she would say. The ship's intercom carried her voice to every deck. I'm sure you've all heard about the evacuation order, she began. The Coalition is pulling back. They're going to bombard the planet from orbit to stop the Kthran. 6 billion people are down there, and the Coalition can save maybe 50,000 of them. She paused, looking at the faces around her. Some were young, fresh from training. Others were veterans with gray hair and old scars. All of them looked back at her with complete attention. I'm taking this ship down to the planet's surface. I'm going to the capital city where 3 million civilians are trapped, and I'm going to hold that position for as long as possible. Maybe reinforcements will come. Maybe we can buy time for more evacuations. Or maybe we'll just die down there trying to save people we've never met. Another pause. This is not a coalition order. This is mutiny, and anyone who follows me could face serious consequences. So I'm giving you all a choice. The shuttles are fueled and ready. Anyone who wants to leave can take a shuttle to one of the other coalition ships. No judgment, no consequences from me. You have 5 minutes to decide, she waited. The hangar was silent except for the background hum of the ship's engines. Soldiers looked at each other, having silent conversations with glances and small gestures. 5 minutes passed. Nobody moved toward the shuttles. Sergeant Hyunwoo stepped forward and saluted. With respect, Captain, where else would we go? This is what we signed up for. One by one, the others saluted. The message was clear. They were staying. Mirai felt something catch in her throat. She swallowed it down and nodded. Then let's go save some people. All hands prepare for atmospheric entry. This is going to get rough. The Incheon Dawn broke formation and dove toward Praxis 4. Its engines burned bright as it cut through the defensive line and headed for the planet below. Behind it, in the darkness of space, other ships began to move. A human destroyer followed the Incheon Dawn. Then 2 human frigates. Then a dozen support vessels. 70 human ships in total broke formation and followed their captain toward the planet. The Incheon Dawn came down hard, its landing thrusters carving burn marks into the plaza at the center of the capital city. Around it, other human ships descended like falling stars, taking up positions throughout the urban landscape. The ships were never designed for planetary landing in combat conditions, but desperate times called for desperate measures. Captain Mirai was the first one down the ramp, her boots hitting the pavement, while the ship's engines were still cooling. The city around her was in chaos. Civilians ran in every direction, some trying to flee, others just running because everyone else was. In the distance, she could hear weapons fire and the distinctive screech of Kthran flyers. Hyunwoo, get me a perimeter, she shouted over the noise. Sergeant Hyunwoo was already moving, directing soldiers as they poured from the ships. They carried weapons, ammunition crates, and portable defensive barriers. Within minutes, they began transforming the plaza into a fortress. Barriers went up across the main streets leading into the square. Heavy weapons mounted on tripods covered each approach. Soldiers took up positions in the buildings around the plaza, turning windows into firing positions. Lieutenant Daeho approached with a local official, a thin alien with orange skin who looked terrified. Captain, this is Administrator Veln. He's been coordinating civilian evacuations. How many people are still in the city? Mirai asked. 3 million, maybe more, Veln said, his voice shaking. We tried to evacuate, but there wasn't enough time. The Kthran are coming from the east and north. They've already overrun the outer districts. We have maybe an hour before they reach the city center. Then we hold the city center, Mirai said simply. Administrator, I need you to get every civilian into the strongest buildings around this plaza. Basements, lower floors, anywhere with thick walls. Can you do that? Veln looked at the human soldiers setting up their defenses, then at the ships that had landed in impossible positions to help his people. Something hardened in his expression. Yes, I can do that. He ran off, already shouting into his communication device. The next hour was controlled chaos. Human soldiers worked with desperate speed to fortify their positions. They knew what was coming. In the distance, columns of smoke rose from burning buildings. The sounds of battle grew closer. Private Bora led a team of combat engineers through the streets, identifying key buildings and preparing them for defense. They rigged explosives at choke points, set up barricades, and marked the best routes for fallback positions. She was 23 years old and had been in the military for only 2 years, but she worked with the calm focus of a veteran. This building here, she said, pointing to a solid concrete structure. This becomes our secondary command post. If the plaza falls, we pull back to here. Reinforce the ground floor windows with whatever you can find. Her team scattered to follow orders. They pulled furniture from nearby buildings, stacked it in windows, and created firing positions. When they couldn't find proper materials, they improvised. A civilian truck became a barricade. A decorative fountain became cover for a machine gun position. Corporal Tajan organized civilian volunteers into supply chains. The locals wanted to help, wanted to do something other than hide and wait to die. He put them to work moving ammunition, carrying water, and preparing medical stations. An elderly alien who ran a restaurant before the war started cooking meals for the soldiers. A group of teenagers formed a runner team, carrying messages between positions when electronic communication failed. You don't have to do this, Tajan told them. You should be in the shelters. A young alien girl, maybe 16 years old, shook her head. You came here to fight for us. The least we can do is help. The Cathran came with the setting of the sun. They poured into the city from multiple directions, moving with the coordinated precision of a hive mind. Thousands of them, maybe tens of thousands. They looked like a nightmare made flesh with too many legs and mandibles that clicked in perfect rhythm. They carried biological weapons that fired acid and parasites. The first contact came at the eastern barricade. Sergeant Hyunwoo was there with his squad, watching the street ahead through his rifle scope. He saw movement, shadows flowing between buildings. Then the Cathran burst into view, a wave of chittering death rushing toward them. Contact east, Hyunwoo shouted. Open fire! The night lit up with muzzle flashes. Human rifles barked in a steady rhythm, each shot carefully aimed. The Cathran in the front ranks fell, but more rushed forward to replace them. They climbed over the bodies of their own dead without slowing down. Keep firing. Controlled bursts! Hyunwoo's voice carried over the chaos. Don't let them reach the barricade. The Cathran hit the defensive line like a wave hitting a seawall. Some tried to climb over the barriers. Others looked for gaps. A few had flying variants that tried to drop on the defenders from above. The humans met them with everything they had. Private Sung-ho, the young soldier who had led civilians to safety in the tunnels, fought at the barricade with his rifle jammed against his shoulder. He fired, worked the bolt, fired again. A Cathran warrior made it to the top of the barrier, its mandibles reaching for him. Sung-ho dropped his rifle and pulled out his combat knife, driving it into the creature's head. It fell backward and he picked up his rifle and kept firing. Grenade out, someone shouted. The explosion sent Cathran bodies flying. The attack faltered for a moment, but only a moment. More came behind them, always more. The same scene played out at every defensive position around the plaza. The Cathran attacked from all sides simultaneously, probing for weaknesses. Human soldiers fought with desperate determination, knowing that behind them were 3 million civilians who had no other protection. In a building overlooking the plaza, Corporal Jisoo and her squad held the second floor. They had set up firing positions at the windows, giving them a clear view of the street below. When Cathran tried to advance down that street, Jisoo's squad cut them down with precise fire. Conserve ammunition, Jisoo called to her team. Pick your targets. We need to make every shot count. A Cathran flyer smashed through the window behind her. Jisoo spun and fired her pistol 3 times. The creature fell dead, but more were coming through the broken window. Her squad turned from the street to deal with this new threat, fighting in the close confines of the building. They won that fight, but barely. 2 soldiers were wounded. The building's defenses were compromised. Jisoo made the call to abandon it and fall back to a stronger position. "Move, move, move," she shouted, leading her squad down the stairs. They emerged into the street just as a large Kathran warrior rounded the corner. The creature was huge, twice the size of a human with armor plates that deflected bullets. Private Minho stepped forward with the squad's only anti-tank weapon. He aimed at the creature's center mass and fired. The rocket streaked forward and detonated, blowing the warrior into pieces, but the backblast from the weapon gave away their position. More Kathran rushed toward them. Jisoo's squad ran for the plaza, fighting a running battle through the streets. They made it back to the defensive line with the Kathran right behind them. Other soldiers provided covering fire, allowing them to get behind the barricades. The night became a blur of fire and blood and screaming. The Kathran attacked in endless waves. Human soldiers fired until their rifles overheated, then kept firing. When ammunition ran low, they fixed bayonets. When the barricades were breached, they pushed the Kathran back with grenades and close combat. Captain Mirai walked the defensive lines throughout the night, seemingly everywhere at once. She checked on wounded soldiers, brought ammunition to depleted positions, and spoke words of encouragement to fighters who were beginning to lose hope. "Hold the line," she called out, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Every minute we hold is another minute those civilians stay alive. Every Kathran we stop here is one that doesn't reach the shelters." The soldiers heard her and found strength they didn't know they had. They held from orbit. The coalition commanders watched in stunned silence. Their displays showed the battle in real time, tracking every engagement. The tactical analysis was clear. The human position should have been overrun in the first hour. But somehow, impossibly, they were still fighting. "They've been holding for 6 hours, a tactical officer reported. "Casualties are severe, but they're not breaking." Commander Tavrek stared at the screens. "How?" "The Kathran outnumber them 100 to 1. By every calculation, they should be dead." "Maybe," said another commander quietly. "There are things that can't be calculated in his observation room." Fleet Marshal Kale Nor watched the battle with his 3 eyes fixed on the display. He saw human soldiers sharing their last ammunition with each other. He saw medics running into fire to drag wounded fighters to safety. He saw Captain Mirai walk among her people, stopping to speak with each one, somehow finding the energy to give them hope when there should be none. He saw them sing. In the middle of the battle, during a brief lull in the Kathran attacks, he heard human voices raised in song. It was rough and off-key, but it carried over the sound of weapons reloading and wounded crying out. They sang their battle songs, songs about home and family and fighting for what mattered. Kale Nor felt something break inside his chest. For 40 years, he had fought with cold logic and mathematical precision. The Coalition Command Council gathered in the war room of the flagship. The mood was tense, angry. On the main display, the battle on Praxis 4 continued. The humans had held through the night and into the morning, but their situation was deteriorating. The Kathran were massing for what looked like a final overwhelming assault. "We need to make a decision," Commander Tavrek said. His scales were a dark, agitated purple. "The humans have bought us time. We should use it to complete our evacuation of essential personnel, and then conduct the orbital bombardment as planned." Several commanders nodded agreement. The math was brutal but clear. The humans were going to die regardless. At least this way, their sacrifice would mean something. "Or," said a younger commander, one of the few who had watched the entire battle, "we could help them." The room fell silent. Tavrek turned to face the speaker. "Help them how? Send more soldiers to die alongside them? Throw away more lives in a battle that cannot be won? They said it couldn't be won 12 hours ago," the young commander replied. "Yet they're still fighting. For how much longer? Look at the tactical display. The Kathran are gathering every unit they have for one massive push. When that hits, the human line will collapse in minutes." The debate grew heated. Some commanders argued for withdrawal and bombardment. Others suggested sending relief forces. A few advocated for doing nothing and seeing if the humans could somehow pull off another miracle. The room filled with noise and argument. Then the door opened and Fleet Marshal Kale Nor entered. The room immediately fell silent. Every commander turned to face him. Kale Nor was a legend, a warrior who had never lost a battle in 40 years. His word carried more weight than all of theirs combined. He walked slowly to the center of the room, his aged scales catching the light from the displays. For a long moment he said nothing, just looked at the screens showing the battle on Praxis 4. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but carried to every corner of the room. "I want to tell you a story," he began, "one I have never shared before." The commanders exchanged confused glances but remained silent. 40 years ago, I was a young officer, eager, ambitious, certain I would become a great warrior. The Cathron invaded our space for the first time, and I was assigned to a patrol ship. We encountered a Cathron scout group near a mining outpost. Kelnor's three eyes closed briefly, remembering. The battle was short. The Cathron were stronger than we expected, faster than our intelligence had reported. They boarded our ship. My squad tried to fight them off in the corridors. One by one, my comrades fell. The sounds they made as they died, I can still hear those sounds. The room remained absolutely silent. No one had ever heard Fleet Marshal Kelnor speak of personal experiences from his early career. I was the last one left, Kelnor continued. A Cathron warrior came around the corner, its mandibles clicking, ready to kill me as it had killed my friends. And I ran. I found a maintenance duct and crawled inside. I hid among the bodies of my dead squadmates. I heard the Cathron moving through the corridor, searching. I held my breath and did not move. I was frozen with terror. His voice grew softer. The Cathron eventually left. When rescue forces arrived hours later, they found me alive among the dead. I was celebrated as the sole survivor, a warrior who had endured impossible odds. But I knew the truth. I survived because I was a coward. I lived because I hid while my friends died. Commander Tavrik stepped forward. "Sir, you don't need to—" "Yes, I do," Kelnor interrupted. "Because that moment defined everything I became. From that day forward, I built my entire career on ensuring I would never have to feel that terror again. I became a master of tactics that kept soldiers at a distance from the enemy. I perfected strategies that used technology instead of warriors. I won battles through cold calculation, never through the heat of combat. I made sure I never had to be brave because I was never in danger." He turned to face the assembled commanders directly. "For 40 years, I have been celebrated as the greatest military mind in the coalition. And it was all built on fear. Fear of feeling terror again. Fear of facing death. Fear of having to choose between my life and doing what was right." Kelnor gestured toward the display showing the human forces on Praxis 4. And then I watched these humans. I watched them charge into battles they should avoid. I watched them risk their lives for strangers. I watched them refuse to abandon 3 million civilians even when logic and mathematics said they should. And do you know what I finally understood? No one spoke. "They terrify me," Kelnor said simply, "not because they're violent or dangerous. They terrify me because they have what I lost 40 years ago. They have the courage to do what's right even when it means they'll die. They transform fear into something greater. Every time they face impossible odds and refuse to run, they show me what I could have been if I had been brave enough." His voice grew stronger. "I have spent 4 decades fighting to never feel terror again. But these humans feel it every day and fight anyway. They know they might die and they go into battle singing. They know the odds are against them, and they make jokes to keep each other's spirits up. They feel fear and choose to fight for each other despite it." Kelnor walked to the main console and placed his hand on it. Captain Murray said something in her last transmission. She said fear is just love worried about losing what it cherishes. The key is to cherish something worth fearing for. These humans have that. They love each other. They love those civilians down there. They love the idea that some things are worth dying for. And that love makes them braver than any species in this room. He turned back to the commanders. "I am done being a coward. I am done calculating acceptable losses and safe strategies. Those humans are down there fighting for what they believe in, and I will not let them die alone." Commander Tavrex looked shocked. "Sir, what are you proposing?" "Full assault landing," Kelnor said firmly. "Every ship, every soldier, every resource we have. We're going down there and we're fighting beside them. Not elegant orbital strikes. Not calculated drone attacks. We land, we fight hand to hand if we must, and we save those 3 million civilians or die trying." "That's madness," Tavrex protested. "We could lose half our forces." "Yes," Kelnor agreed. "We might. But I have led you all for 40 years, and in that time have I ever asked you to follow me into danger? Have I ever put myself at risk? Have I ever shown you that some things are worth more than survival?" He looked around the room at each commander in turn. "I'm asking now, not ordering, asking, will you follow me down there? Will you stand beside these humans and fight for something that can't be calculated or quantified? Will you be brave enough to do what's right instead of what's safe?" The room was silent for a long moment. Then the young commander who had spoken earlier stepped forward. "I'll follow you, sir." Another commander stood. Then another. One by one they rose and pledged to join the assault. Even Commander Tavrex, after a long moment of internal struggle, nodded his agreement. "Then let's move," Kelnor said. "Prepare all ships for combat landing. I want every soldier armed and ready, and someone get me a direct communication line to Captain Mireille. I need to tell her that help is coming." On the surface of Praxis 4, the Cathran were beginning their final assault. Thousands of them moved through the city streets, converging on the plaza from every direction. The humans saw them coming and prepared for what they knew would be their last fight. Sergeant Hyunwoo checked his ammunition. He had 2 magazines left. Around him, his squad was in similar condition. They were exhausted, wounded, running on nothing but determination. "It's been an honor serving with you all," he said quietly. "Honor's all ours, Sergeant," Private Sung-ho replied. Captain Mireille's voice came over their communication devices. "All units, this is the captain. I know you're tired. I know we're out of options, but I need you to hold just a little longer. Can you do that for me?" A chorus of affirmatives came back, soldiers finding strength in their captain's voice. Then Mireille's voice changed, filled with something that might have been hope. "Because I just received a transmission from the Coalition fleet. Fleet Marshal Kelnor is bringing the entire armada down here. Every ship, every soldier, they're coming to fight beside us." For a moment, the defensive line was silent. Then someone started cheering. The sound spread. Soldiers who had been preparing to die suddenly finding something they hadn't expected. Hope. The sky above the city began to fill with ships. Hundreds of them, descending through the atmosphere in perfect formation. But this time they weren't dropping bombs or firing from a distance. They were landing right in the middle of the fighting, deploying soldiers who rushed to join the human defensive lines. The lead ship landed in the plaza, and Fleet Marshal Kelnor himself walked down the ramp. He wore full combat armor, carried a rifle, and was surrounded by his personal guard. This was not the distant commander who fought from orbit. This was a warrior coming to stand beside other warriors. He found Captain Mireille at her command post, directing the integration of the coalition reinforcements. She looked up as he approached, surprise evident on her tired face. "Fleet Marshal," she said, attempting to salute. Kelnor stopped her with a gesture. "No salutes. We're all soldiers now.